And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker. So Morgan Bailey is a member of a group that I belong to called Awarepreneurs. That's how we know each other. And he is truly somebody that sees business as one of the main vehicles for how we can create good in the world. Sustainable, equitable businesses that really support communities and people. Currently, he works with a company called Future Bright. It's a B Corp. So if you were with us in September, you understand exactly what that is. And what they do is they guide organizations through change. He is also an entrepreneur mentor. He's the host of the podcast Profit Meets Impact. And if you're active in our LinkedIn group on LinkedIn, I dropped his latest podcast into that group so that you guys can all experience that as well. And what is it, Morgan? Now there's 7 episodes. It's fairly new.
Yes, it's fresh off the press.
And what month did you start that?
I launched it, I think in November.
Okay, yeah, so it's really brand spanking new. Morgan is also grossly overeducated with several masters and a PhD, and he's a serious adventurer. If something isn't high risk as far as outdoor activities go, he's probably not involved with it. And so now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Morgan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here with you all. And I want to thank Dr. Pelfini for kind of getting us into our heart space. Because I think one of the things when we think about business, so often people shift from here's the heart-centered version of me and here's the work version of me. And the decisions we make in both of those areas are different sometimes. And it doesn't have to be, actually. There's no reason why our heart has to close as we start to make business decisions. And in fact, if you look at the environmental consequences, the social issues, it's because when people were making those business decisions, they've been doing so with their heart closed, focused on short-term thinking, things such as shareholder returns, and not the overall impact that we're having on our communities, our environment, and on ourselves. So with that little preface, I invite everyone to just be curious as we go through this and try to kind of maintain that heart openness that Dr. Pelfini kind of led us into there as we go through that. So go ahead and share my screen now. I don't have a load of slides. And I'm going to go through some slides. I'm going to share a little history about myself, my story, leave some time for reflection, teach a little bit, and then send us into breakout groups to sort of process this information. All right. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay. So we all know the topic of conversation here. This photo here, I actually took last weekend on Mount Shasta. And when we think about day to day, anyone who's ever climbed a high mountain, it's really step by step. There is no, getting to the summit in a second. It's really step by step. And as we go through and making these decisions, every day is a little different. And every day we're going to make different decisions. So what kind of led me into this philosophy? I'm going to start with my story. This is my story. I'll go through this in brief. But I believe our stories are important because they kind of speak to what our purpose is. They speak to where our values came from and how they show up in the world. And again, we don't have to separate who we are from what we do because really that's impossible. I think, in Western society, we've kind of led ourselves to believe that that's possible, but it's really not. So as you can see here in the upper left, I started, as many of us did, as a small child who started to enjoy a little bit of risk. And you can see me skateboarding there. I went to college in Santa Cruz to study physics because I thought, well, maybe if I study that, we can solve a small problem like fusion. Unfortunately, I wasn't that smart. But I did work for an alternative energy company. Really, again, some of those values coming through saying, well, how can we do that? That was with a fuel cell company. Now, I decided I had a love for travel and getting exposure and doing things and apparently jumping off things still. Except I ditched the skateboard, just for a pair of shoes there. And I ended up going to graduate school because I wanted to focus some of the energy I had on focusing on some more environmental issues where I studied water quality. And there I really want to see how can I bridge water quality with people, which sent me to Africa and doing a lot of work in Africa and India around water, sanitation, and air quality, really seeing how that happened. And I'll go in a little more detail on that picture right there in just a second. After that, I think in my 30s, I realized that falling is a bad thing. So I started tying myself to rocks and using ropes. And then, I did a postdoc through UCSF, ultimately before leading me into nonprofits, where I did nonprofit management for a while and really started to understand what is this intersection of business and impact, what are the limitations of nonprofits, and what are the impacts that for-profit organizations can have. So I want to tell a brief story here. In this photo, I was in Kenya, and that's me in the orange shirt, hair roughly about the same length. My hair was actually, about 2 or 3 inches when the pandemic happened. But, as many of us, we've foregone the haircuts. And so I was doing a health survey in Kenya, and I was visiting this family of Maasai. And you can see the conditions are pretty basic. Now, this individual in the red shirt who I was interviewing, they were drinking out of a dam. They didn't have access to sanitation. They didn't have a latrine, very basic, situations. And as I'm sitting there interviewing him, he stops me and he pulls out a cell phone out of his pocket and answers it. And I think he kind of liked making me wait. And I sat there for about 10 minutes as he just laughed and chatted with his friend. And as he was sitting there, I was confused because I said, cell phones aren't that cheap. There's not a lot of purchasing power here. This individual doesn't have access to water or sanitation, yet he has a phone. And any economist would say, well, that's not really on the hierarchy of needs, but somehow he found money to buy the phone, to keep credit on it, and to keep it charged. And I thought, well, what's the difference here? And I thought, well, you know what? A business brought that. A supply chain was created here, and a value proposition that was very strong was made. And whereas when we're trying to convince people that you need sanitation or you need water, we don't always put the sort of business lens on of how can we market this in a way that's really going to work with people, as opposed to just convincing people like this is good for you. So how can we take those same sort of business skills that would put a cell phone in that individual's hands and instead provide services that can both create an economy, create a supply chain to make an impact. So that got me really curious and made me start to lean in more to how can we do things around social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, which is bridging, how we build businesses with how we make an impact. So as we sit in this, all of us have a different view of what's important to us in the world and what it is that we are interested in bringing, what our purpose is. And so in a second, we're gonna actually use a tool called Fun Retro, but I just want everyone to sit for a second and think, where do I care to make an impact? Maybe this is an area in which you're already making an impact. Maybe this is an area that you think, that you have an inkling there. Now, don't try to put boundaries on it as to, I don't know how this relates to business or this or that. We can figure that out later, but just sit with that for a second. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna drop a link into chat. And what I want you to do is go ahead and that first column, you're just going to go ahead and click that plus button and go ahead and just write down, where do you want to make an impact? Just take about a minute here. So what we can see here is the impacts are varied. The impacts are the things that people are interested in, they really run a spectrum. From working with indigenous communities, to working with silent organizations, to working with other disenfranchised groups. And it doesn't really matter what your business is. There's probably a way in which you can help these sorts of motivations through the very work that you do. So we're going to take a second and we're going to talk about what are the models by which people actually make an impact through their business. So there are three ways. We're going to start with the most basic. There's an externalized method of business impact. I mean, and that's pretty much you give money or time. You make money and you donate it. You volunteer your time to make an impact. Now, this is a great way, and a lot of you are probably already doing this. It is a great way to make an impact. Now, the challenge is this is dependent on how much money you're making and how much time you have. And as solo entrepreneurs and business owners, we know that that fluctuates. So that means our giving and our ability to make an impact fluctuates. Now, another model is what we call the mixed model. So I don't know if people are familiar with the Tom's shoes, but they have a mixed model, okay? And what that means is for every pair of shoes that someone buys, they give a pair of shoes. So their profit is directly related to giving. It's a one-to-one. And so if they have a bad business year, that doesn't mean they cut off their impact. It does mean that they give less, but they're using that one-to-one model. Warby Parker is another one that uses a similar model in which you buy a pair of glasses and someone else gets a pair of glasses on the other side of the world. Now, the third is this internalized method of business impact. And what that means is by the very nature of how you do business, you do well. Now, this is kind of the model of B Corps. And we're going to talk a lot more about this internalized method, as that's kind of, that's the ideal. Because what that means is by the very way that you operate your business, you are making an impact. And maybe that's who you choose as your energy provider. Maybe that's the partners that you choose or the customers that you work with, or how you compensate your employees. Through the very nature of what you're doing, you're making that impact and you're living those missions, values, and purpose. Now, on the point of mission, values, and purpose, if you haven't spent time to really think about what does that look like for you and your business, I highly recommend it. It's great. I usually, do that once a year to kind of refine that and come up with those values and then just benchmark and say, am I actually showing up on this? Because it's very common that we can go throughout an entire year acting on values that we didn't actually know that we were adhering to. And sometimes they don't actually serve us. So taking that time, particularly at the beginning of the year, it's a great opportunity to do that. And if people have questions, feel free to pop them in chat. As we move forward. All right. Either I'll completely lost or I'm making complete sense. So I'll make the assumption on the latter.
You're making complete sense.
You're good.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to show you a messy slide. I'm not a graphic designer, and so, but this is kind of looking at internalized business impact. So here are just some of the functional areas of business. You have marketing, operations, finance, your service offerings, your product, your HR, right? There are other functional areas, but it's really like, how can we live these missions, these values, and these purpose through these ways of operating? So let's take operations, for instance. Okay. In operating your business, you have an office, maybe it's your home office. You have energy needs. You have where you get your paper from. You have where you get your products from. You have where you buy your things from. Are you buying them from Amazon? Or are you saying, actually, there's a more aligned supplier? Are you being intentional about how you're doing that? Now, again, the beauty of this is your business doesn't have to shift necessarily to continue to make these impacts. You just have to take a little bit of time to say, how can I do this in a more intentional way? So just by the very nature of your business, you may be supporting an aligned supplier that is doing good in the world as well. And so you're amplifying your impact through your dollar in that case. Now, in terms of HR, there's obviously a lot around diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of both who you're working with as well as suppliers that you're using. Sustainable wages, obviously, is a huge one. Benefits that we have towards those that we work with, our employees. Volunteer. Now, volunteer is, I put it on there because I think it is important. That is more of an externalized, but still important. Now, when it comes to our services, I think this is where everyone here is probably already nailing this, because you are service providers. And the fact that you're all still here and you're all still functioning businesses mean you're doing this right. You're being relationship driven. You're delivering quality service. You're working with values aligned customers. And this is a really important point. And I think we all know that working so closely with customers, if we do not have this, our businesses don't work. Now, there may be ways in which you can amplify this. But think about who would really be an ideal values aligned customer that you would like to serve or work with. How might you get in touch with them? What might that look like? Who's doing really amazing things in the world that you're like, wow, if I could help support them, that would be amazing. Another thing to think about is, service delivery. Right now, we have very low impact service delivery, a lot of us, because we're working over Zoom. One day the world might resume. The world will resume. We don't know what that looks like yet. And how we deliver our services may be different. And maybe we say, hey, you know what? Is it worth, driving an hour and a half to this client? Let me co-align with the client on this and bring up, say, hey, I don't really want to, make a big impact environmentally. Can we do this over Zoom? Or is there another option? How can we think about ways that we can deliver our services to make the least amount of impact possible? Even on finances, right? I mean, corporate giving is another way of, that's more of an external, but still an important way to do that. There's ethical investing. Many of us have investments, and there's quite a few firms out there who develop indices which are really looking at how can we invest our money in organizations that are making a positive impact. They're still making a profit. They're still doing really well, but they're making an impact. And actually, studies have shown that organizations who are really making an impact and are focusing on looking at longer term investments and longer term sustainability goals actually outperform those who are focused on short term measures. Patagonia, which is kind of, they were the first B Corp in California and kind of the poster child in many ways. Their goal is, they said, we want to design a business that's going to exist in 100 years, right? So as many of us are thinking in terms of quarters, and the businesses that we work in are worried about the next 2 to 3 years, the ability to think longer term and think, what would it be like, to have a business in 100 years? How would we make decisions differently? Because when we think about our communities, when we think about society, and we think about the environment, I kind of wish that we were thinking 100 years out, 100 years ago. I think we would be in a different place. And I kind of hope that in 100 years, they'll look back and say, wow, I'm glad they started thinking about that now, so that our children's children's children, won't have to deal and won't have to actually make that shift themselves. Now, in terms of finance, there's also values-driven banks. There's Beneficial Bank is a B Corp bank, actually, located in the Bay Area. So there are other things. And I think looking at local service providers, values-driven banks, to think about who am I partnering with and do they align? And the beautiful thing is, like, once you start making those connections, there's a synergy there. And all of a sudden, I think, and that's what people see in the B Corp community. And that's why I think, I know you've spoken about B Corps, is that they synergize with each other. They figure out ways that they can work together, they can work better together. And it's inspiring. And now all of a sudden, like, you're working with a bunch of people who are doing really amazing things. And in terms of marketing, like, I think an important thing is, what message are we putting out there? What are we standing for? Okay, so yes, we can promote our services, but are we also promoting our values by saying, hey, actually, social injustice is an issue and my organization stands by that? Or this environment, or promoting how you're doing things environmentally, or that this is something significant to you. Now, that will help differentiate you to people who that matters. And we think about the long-term impacts of our business, and we think about our long-term customers, like the ability to sort of pull magnetically those who have similar value sets means that they're going to stay with us for much longer. And they're also going to, help us buffer the impact of things such as a pandemic. One of the organizations that I've worked with and helped support is Manny's. SF, which is a social gathering space, which was a restaurant and a coffee shop. Now, Manny's has been very big about, doing stuff around the election and, promoting a lot of conscious business practices and things and building the community around them. Now, when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden their revenue dropped to zero, right? They were a restaurant, they were a gathering space. That's not possible. But because they had done so much community outreach, they were very quickly able to create a program which people could sponsor them. Then they were able to create more content. And even though they haven't had a physical gathering space, their businesses thrived throughout this time and actually has become a leader and made impact across the nation. Right? And a lot of that's because of the partnerships and the community support that they've developed through that time. Do we have any questions on this? In a second, what I'm going to ask is people to go into breakout groups and to think about, I have an idea of what my impact might be or what the impact I would like to make. And maybe this has changed throughout listening to this, which is totally fine. And to think about what are ways in which you can further align your business with the changes and the impact you want to see in the world. But I want to pause here just for a second to see if there are any questions, comments, or contradictions. Totally fine with that too.
I've got kind of a different take on this. I just started studying how gratitude makes a difference in how I see myself, how I work with others, how I make an impact. And I'm looking at how I can make that a pillar of my business. So I'm open to ideas.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the gratitude thing is huge in so many ways in life. And I think figuring that out, and people feel that, your customers will feel that. And so I think, when we get into breakout groups, that's an amazing question to pose in there. Sheila, looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, you instructed us to fill out an answer in the first column. Some people have also put stuff in the second or third column, but I don't remember hearing instructions for that.
They jumped the gun, they cheated, so they will be penalized, but no, it's fine. In a second, we're gonna fill out that second column. And the idea is to generate ideas. So we'll go ahead and go into breakout groups in just a second. And what I want you to think about is what are the ways, in which you can use your business to make an impact. And try to think specifically about this, because what we want to be able to walk away with is like, what can we really do here? And what's an idea? Maybe like, oh, actually there's this business that I really want to talk to. They're doing some really interesting stuff that maybe I could partner with them on. Or actually, I think there is this program, to change where my energy comes from. And I'd like to learn more about that. Okay, so, think about how you can use your business to make an impact. Okay. Are there any questions? We're gonna go into breakout groups for about 12 minutes. Is anyone confused about what we're about to do? You'll be in groups about three to 4
Morgan,
days.
I do have one comment. You haven't said anything about, at least I didn't hear you say anything about leadership in the corporation, both from the C-suite and from the board, that has to do with the values of the corporation and how these are driven down, not only into the organization itself, but out into the suppliers or vendors that they work with, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I think I was speaking directly to this audience and knowing that we're not, big corporations, but many of us do. On that leadership front, it's absolutely critical that that one, they define their values, but they also figure out how to operationalize them, because that's one of the major gaps. And I think, and I actually just recorded a podcast yesterday with the CEO of the organization I work with, Future State, about how that actually looks like in practice. And so I think that's a really important thing, because, as you develop, as an organization develops and these values, it's really to be there to help inform business decisions and how it comes alive in all of your conversations. So I think the leadership element is extremely critical to it. John, does that
Yeah, just a quick note. I managed UCLA's corporate directors program for 5 years, a few years back, introduced a corporate social responsibility module. One of the times that was presented, I had Casey Sheehan, who was CEO of Patagonia at that time. And he talked about how their values are spread entirely throughout the corporation and then out into their vendors and their suppliers and so on. And he made the comment that because of our values, for every position we post, we get over 1,000 applications. It's that. So there's a whole other side of that, of alignment that resulted from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're doing is when we're looking at this, internalized business impact, that in essence is what that is. It's like propagating those values and the missions through everything that you do. So when you're looking at a vendor and you're saying, well, I really want a vendor who's diverse because that's really important to me, right? So that's how you're propagating your values directly into who you work with, right? And by doing so, you're supporting that group and supporting that they work with.
Yeah, the other piece I saw there.
To the breakouts.
Yeah. There's going to be time for discussion there. Don, I appreciate that, those comments. So let's go ahead and jump into breakout groups for about 12 minutes.
All right, you're going to be 3 to 4 people, and you get a 2-minute warning right before you are about to be pulled back to the main room.
Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back. Yeah, that goes by fast, huh? One thing that came to me as we were talking is there's so many different ways to do this. How we run our businesses, to where we buy our products, to which Airbnb we choose to stay at. And I think an important thing to note in all this is, like, we don't have to do all of this at once. I think it can be overwhelming to try to think about, well, okay, where am I getting my paper from? Or what are the values of this vendor that I'm working with? Or this corporation I'm working with isn't feeling like it's totally values aligned, and it can be overwhelming. And so I think it's important to know that, like, humanity in this time, we're not really sure how to do all this. It's a messy process and we're all learning. So it's about taking those sizable chunks and thinking about, well, what are some of the things that I can do? So I'd love to hear from the group just 2 or 3 comments about what came out of those conversations. Lori.
Hi, one of the great things that Angela brought up, we were just talking about the big things, and she said, well, Lori, don't forget about the small things, the little things we can do on a day-to-day basis. Turn down the heat, choose a different paper supplier, use less paper. So that really was very helpful, Angela. Thank you to bring that up. It's not always the big, become a B Corp, change the world, just one step at a time.
Yeah, Lori, thank you for that. And I think if you think about it, if all of us took a single step right now, like, it would yield a big step. And so I think it's important, because I know when I try to do something that's just too big and overwhelming, I don't follow through on it and it falls flat. I'm sure all of us have experienced that in some way. And so I think, yeah, thank you. Those small steps, really critical. What else? Ginny, yeah.
Okay, what I was talking in my group is I'm a human resource consultant, and I work a lot with small business owners. The problem in our workforce right now is disengagement. And so about 70% of the people in the workplace are not happy. And so for me, my impact is to try to educate owners to respect and honor their employees and for who they are, and to get more to the heart of it, rather than, you're coming to work and you have a job, and I think if employers, and that's the kind of clients I work with, is that if we can get to understand these are people just like us who have things going on at home and everything else, if we could see them as this person and treat them that way, I think businesses would be a lot more productive and we'd have a lot more happy people. So that's my goal. So, yeah, it's a big goal, but I love it. That's my whole passion.
It's amazing. And, you know, the organization I work for they're actually really fantastic about that. And they said, hey, look, our first goal is that everyone is just okay and that they take care of themselves. And I didn't really believe it at first. I was like, okay, you're saying that. But when I actually came to it, I said, hey, I'm stressed out. And they're like, just take tomorrow off.
Mhm.
I'm like, but what about those meetings? And they're like, it's fine. Like, just we'll reschedule it. And in turn, that made me so much more loyal and committed to them.
Exactly.
Yeah. What else? Maybe take one more comment. You can come off mute and speak if you're so brave. All right, yell.
Well, I'll share something that I shared with my group that recently hit me. I had one of those big milestone birthdays, my 65th, a few days ago. And I decided to engage the Marie Kondo philosophy when it comes to people. I want to surround myself, look at Judy's face. I want to surround myself with people who spark joy for me. Because recently I realized I was spending a lot of psychic energy obsessing about people that I was having some difficulty with, and I decided to let them go. Whether it's clients or friends or family or whoever, I really, really, especially in a time like this, want to surround myself with people who give me joy, and I want to give them joy in return. So I'm focused on that in my practice, in my work, as well as in my personal life.
Thank you. It's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to do in our businesses. It's a hard thing to do in life. So I appreciate that. It takes a lot of courage. I struggle with that, and I know we all. I think particularly when we're looking at clients who maybe don't feel right, and like saying goodbye to those, there's a lot of scarcity and fear around that, and it's justified. Like those are our source of revenue, but figuring out how to navigate that. And ultimately, the cost it has on us and it weighs on us, I think, is really critical. So as we move to close, I want to take just a couple more minutes to go ahead and go back to that fun retro. And just in that last column, if there are any specific actions that you can take, anything that came to mind, however small, just go ahead and write that down. So what I recommend is, you'll have this link. You can refer back to this link, read through it in your personal time, and see just what ideas are out there. I think we have this collective knowledge around different ways that we can make an impact. And again, this isn't a perfect science. So I recommend that everyone, continue this conversation. Continue to, there is no right or wrong way to do this. And I mean, I think the amount of business knowledge and wisdom that you all have here and different things that you tried is really amazing. And as someone, I'm, somewhat early on in my career still, like I look up all to you with, all of that knowledge, and, I'm gleaning from it. So I appreciate that as well. Now, the last thing I'm going to share is just, when we think about resources and inspiration here, there are a couple things locally. There's the Conscious Capitalism chapter. There's the Be Local Bay Area, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the B Corp movements. Obviously, there are, my podcast, which is Profit Meets Impact. And you can find it at profitmeetsimpact.com. You can download it on your podcast, whatever podcast app that you have. Subscribe, like, comment, do all those things. It really helps. There's also another one that is called Awarepreneurs, which is another great podcast that, Angela's, familiar with Paul Zelizer, who's his podcast. Another really great one that interviews a lot of business owners, similar to my own. A great tool that I suggest looking at is the B Impact Assessment. You don't need to pay for it. You can go online, sign up, and you can just go through the assessment, and it'll show you what are different ways in which you can do some of the actions that we talked about today. And so it's kind of a really great framework just to get your mind moving. And if it feels aligned to move towards a B Corp, to becoming a B Corp, that's a great thing. If you have any questions around any of this, you can go ahead and email me either at morgan@intrepidcoaching.com or morgan.bailey@futurestate.com. I would be happy to answer that. I know people who help move people through B Corps or B Corp certification, so I'm happy to provide any resources on that as well. And so with that, I will either open up for questions if there's time, or I will cede the floor. Thank you all so much. It's been a great pleasure.
Morgan, I'm wondering if you might just give us a brief intro into that form that we're using. I've not seen it before. It's very helpful. I think it's really interesting, and just tell us a little bit how to find that.
Easy Retro. You can just you can go to easyretro.com, or it was Fun Retro up until about a couple months ago. So either Fun Retro or Easy Retro. And it's pretty much as easy as it looks. It's a really great way to engage people online in a way that's not overly complicated. And there are different tools like voting and things like that. So
cool. Thank you. It would be useful.
Sheila.
You could,
Any other questions for Morgan?
if Morgan or somebody, if you could put your email addresses in the chat, please, because that slide disappeared before I could get them down.
Yeah, I'll put that in there.
And also, is the Easy Retro, is this a free service or is it paid?
I think you can get some. I think you get some of these boards for free, and then I think there are paid options as well. Any other questions?
Just a reminder to people who want to go back to this chat, make sure you save it. I've found beautiful information I can't find again. So the little 3 dots at the bottom, you can save it and rename it.
Awesome suggestion. Any other direct questions for Morgan?
All right. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your week. And it was really an honor and a pleasure to be with you all here today.
So Ulrika, do you think we have time to, well, and first of all, let's welcome, or let's thank Morgan. This has been an amazing discussion in so many different ways. I hope that all of you are going to walk away from this with at least one small thing that you can do to make yourself more in alignment with your actual values in the way that you practice your business or practice your life. Like Yael said, it's not easy to let go of people. It's even more challenging to let go of clients. But I have found that it is the best thing that you can do. Once you really commit to what's important, you start to see a lot more of that show up in your life. And so you really need to be committed and focused. What do you want? If you want to make more impact, really commit to that and shift away from the profit aspect. Because here's the crazy thing. Once you're in alignment with who you are and what you want, the profit shows up. And that's one way of really knowing, are you in alignment with what's truly important to you and in your heart? So maybe go back to what Dr. Mike was talking about. Get very clear on what it is that's in your heart. Align with that more often and see what sort of impact it has on your own business.